Yeah, quickly, my name's Steve Hartrich, and I work in a project called The Lab, which is focused on it's a knowledge generation project focused on understanding how the market systems approach can address decent work. And I'm here with my colleague, Alexandra Twahirwa, who's working in the Promoting Decent Work in Rwanda's Informal Economy project. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done in terms of market systems construction, and Alex will bring in some of the practical side, I hope, if he can join in on how they're implementing in a project related to construction. So why are we here today? Oops. Yeah, I wanted just to kind of go over initially why I think construction is important for market systems practitioners. Just to kind of set the scene a little bit before we dive too much into the detail. Then I want to talk through some of the market systems analyses that we've done in the Africa context and see sort of what are the commonalities that we're finding in these markets, and maybe how that might be useful for you guys. And then looking to, again, this Rwanda and some of the interesting implementation and interventions that they've done to sort of address some of these challenges. And that will probably take about 25 minutes, and then we will open it up for discussion. So just quickly, this lab project that I work in is funded by the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, and the project that Alex works in is funded by the Embassy of Sweden in Kigali. So that's enough of an introduction. Let's get in. Why is construction important? I think a number of people here are either living in the context of a developing country in Africa, or have been recently and have seen the exponential population growth. Sort of, if we look at Uganda in the bottom left there, the population has quadrupled in the last 50 years, which is quite substantial. And then also, if you're looking at the urbanization rates, the sort of right now we're about 25% urbanization in Uganda, but that in the next 30 years will push up to 45%. So we're looking at a huge amount of population growth, and then a lot of people moving from farm to city. So that's really, I think, it's going to put a strain on the infrastructure. I mean, it will, and it already has. And there's a real impetus for governments and private sector to develop things quickly, but also cheaply. And the second part of that is really the which really causes some concerns and relative to working conditions in the sector. So maybe looking at the sort of trends in employment to sort of reiterate the point of construction being rather important. And if we look to Asia and the period between 2005 and 2015, it's probably a couple of steps ahead of Africa in terms of industrialization on the whole. And we see a sharp drop in agricultural employment, and the kind of a gain in most of the other sectors that are reported here, with construction seeing the most, that's the largest share of gain in employment. So really, I think if we're looking to Africa, we should see something like this in the near future, and perhaps this sort of 10 years between 2015 and 2025. So we have huge amount of growth going irrespective of if our projects or market systems projects are doing very much of anything. So how do we as projects maybe add some value? Well, probably where we, particularly at the ILO, think that the value of market systems projects might be is in the job quality spectrum. And to be honest, in construction, the quality is quite poor. There's very high rates of informality, much higher than most other sectors except for agriculture. I think in Rwanda, 98% of the employees are informal. So that means that they don't have access to formal pension schemes, or probably most importantly for them, stability of contracts. They're on daily contracts, weekly contracts, and that has implications for how they're paid or their stability of income, which is a big concern for them. by the nature of the trade, there's really poor occupational safety and health. People are working at heights, they're moving materials around on site, working with machinery that cuts or is exposed to high heat. So there are traditionally quite a lot of accidents, and even the best of countries with the most protections, but often in Africa, they're lacking preventative culture. And yes, the safety equipment as well. The two graphs on the right show some research that we did on some construction sites. Top right one shows that about 3 out of 5 had been hurt to some extent on while working in construction and missed at least 30 minutes of work. And the bottom right, 2/3 of the respondents said that they knew somebody that had been hospitalized in the last 6 months. Beyond that, there's challenges with gender, and there's challenges particularly of moving from the lower skilled jobs towards anything that's more higher skilled. So all sorts of challenges, and when we combine this with the growth that we're seeing, I think it's something that really is an area where we can focus a lot of effort in the future and be more important, this nexus of job quality and construction. So sort of before we dive into what the solutions are, I think it's important to understand what the challenges are. And so we've looked at 3 market systems analyses in Africa, one in Zambia, Mozambique, and Rwanda. And we've kind of synthesized the findings in this brief you'll see on the right-hand side, and sort of found some interesting, there were enough contextual differences, but quite a few similarities between the 3 sort of contexts in building construction. So maybe just to run you through what the process of what we've done that might help you if you look at a construction sector market system in the future. I think the first step that we typically like to do is sort of map out the sector. And here, this shows kind of the power balance and maybe where your sort of target group is working. We have sort of the contractor at the top, which maybe has an engineer or 2 working for him that's formalized and on a very good pay scale. And then there's the degrees of formality and pay and exposure to working conditions decrease, I guess, as you get closer to the bottom. So those at the bottom, the manual laborers are making the least amount of money, they're exposed to the most hazards, and they're never on formal contracts, so no contract stability. Also in Rwanda, interestingly enough, the manual laborers had the highest percentage of women, and in fact, it was the only place in the sector where there were women. So sort of see that by mapping out this sector, we understand maybe where our target group is, and we can zoom in on them to see how we can make the working conditions a bit better for them. The second component is really to understand sort of how did the workers arrive in these jobs, and why are the contractors making the decisions that they're making? So one important thing that we found is that construction is a magnet for very low-skilled workers. If we look at the graph on the top right, shows that construction actually has, I think, 5 out of 6 workers have a primary degree of education or less, which has a much lower educational attainment than manufacturing or other urban sectors. So it sort of provides an opportunity, I suppose, for those that may be moving from farm to the city without really any skills or education, that they can come in and start working on a site. And sort of, it's really that first point of call and sort of some of the qualitative interviews that we did, that people get these jobs as a matter of survival. So they feel quite powerless when they're at the complete, the contractor has all the power of hiring, keeping them on board. So it's really not much they can do. And as a result, if sort of the conditions on the site maybe not favorable to them, if they complain about them, the chances are they won't be working there the next day and be asked to leave the site. So they sort of just do what they're told to do and not question it. So it causes sort of a I guess, attention and them being able to improve their status on the construction sites. Secondarily, if we look at the contractor side, sort of there's a really intense pressure to cut costs and to be competitive in construction. So we have, if we look at this graph on the right, one contractor told me this is sort of the cost breakdown of a typical site. So we have 63% in building materials and taxes, 12% in financial costs, and then 25% on either on the profit, risk, and labor on those contracts. So really, the 25% there that you see is the only area where they can they have flexibility on their proposals. So naturally, that's where they're going to be driven to cut costs. So they probably have a fixed profit margin and margin of risk. So they often try to compete on reducing costs and labor. So how do you reduce costs and labor? You may not invest in the wages or sort of the conditions that you have on site, and safety or social security, or having more stable contracts. Secondarily, the contracts are contractors have quite unpredictable workflow. They sort of get might get one contract next week, and then there's 2 contracts in 6 months, and then maybe nothing after that. So it's really difficult to have a stable employee on your team when you're sort of unsure about what sort of work demands there are going to be. Also, as you're building a site, the skills required change over time. Sort of need people to clear the site initially, maybe build the foundation, and as it goes up, you need people that can build with bricks or steel, or and then that shifts into sort of painting, plumbing, this kind of stuff. So the range of skills is quite diverse, so it's not conducive to having one employee on board for an entire job. And then also the perceived benefits of formalizing a worker are quite low relative to the cost. Looking into the constraints, after we sort of understood the workers, the challenges to the workers and the contractors, we sort of want to understand what the key constraints are to them. And there are 3 that we found that are quite common throughout the Zambia, Mozambique, and Rwanda context, and those are financial services, skills, and procurement and contracting. So I'll just run through the 3 of those quickly. So if we look at financial services, there's typical lending constraints, which we see in a lot of market systems projects or in various sectors. But so there's poor account history, not a bankable business plan, lack of collateral, which makes it difficult for banks to lend. But also, the contractors themselves don't get paid on a regular interval. So Zambian banks really didn't want to lend to them because they couldn't get repaid regularly, and they thought that they were too risky because of that. There's contract guarantees, which are required to participate in the public procurement space. So if you want to bid for a public contract, you have to have a sort of a guarantee, which in Zambia could be 2% or Mozambique 5 to 7% of cash, a deposit that goes in to guarantee the total works of that project. So if you can't really apply to multiple tenders at the same time. If you have to have cash flow for 1 to make that deposit, and 2, you can't really apply to multiple tenders if you're a small business. So it favors kind of the international ones. And the last thing is that's interesting is that one contractor indicated that getting a preferential rate and trust with a bank takes time. And that's how you reduce your costs in sort of putting forward a proposal. So if it comes to a point where you have to service your loan through payment and you haven't been paid yet as a contractor, and your option is to pay your workers or pay your loan, you'll pay your loan because that will keep you in the good books for longer than paying your workers. And that has a significant impact on the workers themselves, as they often are not paid on time, and that's a huge concern for them. Secondarily, on skills, look, in all 3 contexts, there's a lack of skills. The sector is growing immensely, and there's really the training opportunities are inadequate. It's not really good curricula, it's not qualified trainers, but beyond that, most low-skilled workers just don't have the savings to attend these trainings, and they don't have the time. So we talked to one worker who, for her to upskill, would have had to have taken a 12-month course, which would have cost 40% of her salary for the year. And she's no way she can take time off work for that period of time, and no way she could ever afford that when she's living in poverty. So they're just not accessible. And then also the investment into apprenticeships is quite limited because of this informal arrangement of working. One cabinet maker told me that he invested in training somebody for 6 months, and then after he was trained, he left and set up shop somewhere else. So there's just no sort of loyalty if you're hiring people informally. Lastly, on the procurement space, normally procurement is an area where you can kind of level the playing field, but it often favors international firms. In Zambia, we saw that 95% of big contracts were awarded to foreign firms who have access to cheaper capital, and they're often not incentivized to develop local skills. In Zambia and Rwanda, they sort of have to subcontract out parts of these big contracts to local companies, but they often subcontract out the least profitable parts or the riskiest parts. And so there's not really a skills development that goes on in the contracting process. And then, lastly, there sort of this component that the government is paying for these public works through procurement, but they're often procuring bad working conditions. They're evaluating procurement or contracts on lowest price, and they could have the opportunity to say, look, you need to have a certain amount of formal workers here. You need to have responsible sort of knowledge transfer or responsible contracting, and there are provisions for that in Rwanda, but they just never evaluate them. So maybe there's some opportunity there. So I think that's all I wanted to say about the analysis side. Now I want to turn over to Alexander for where the opportunities are here. And I'm not sure if he has sound, but maybe I'm hoping that yes. Great. I'll turn it over to Alexander. You can introduce yourself and the project.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for I had a connection issue. Yeah, as Steve has indicated, I'm called Alexander, and I work in Rwandan project. I work with a project called Promoting Decent Work in Rwanda's informal sector, and the project is work is doing in two sectors. So we are in building construction sector and garment and tailoring sectors. So in terms of time frame, the project is a 4-year project, and we are implementing this project from implementation started from July 2018, and the project is going to end November 2021. So we are using what we call market system development approach, targeting informal sector workers and improving working conditions and employment opportunities. On the skills, right on the scales, after market system analysis, the market system analysis findings indicated or shows underlying causes on the skills, and one of the underlying causes on the skills was a lack of contractors' investment on job for training of workers. And as you know, I've already indicated, we are targeting informal sector workers in the building, construction, and garment sector. So the reason behind that we realized by contractors was that the reason why the contractors are not investing into their workers is because, as you know, the informal sector workers are moving everywhere. They are not permanent workers. That was clearly highlighted by the contractors, the reason why they are not investing informal sector workers. So, as the project, what we are trying to do in order to see how we can work with the different partners in order to see how we can upgrade the skills of workers. That we are trying to work with material supplies companies. When I talk about material supplies companies, we are trying to work with painting companies in Rwanda. So far, the project has managed to conclude a partnership agreement with 2 painting companies, and these painting companies are going to work with the project in upgrading the skills of workers. These companies were doing this, but the way it was being done was a matter of like advertising of their products, new products for the painters. But we want to move from there by also upgrading the skills. So in upgrading these skills of workers, we found out that there were no curriculum for this specific target group of workers, and there is no training modules for these specific categories of workers. So we are working with the government institutions like Rwanda Polytechnic and the Workforce Development Authority. These are the government institutions, in order to see how we can develop specific training module and curriculum for this specific group of workers building construction. So we hope that, and we are seeing this, that this module, if it is well implemented, of course, it is going to increase or expand the skills of workers. And then we are hoping that we are now in piloting those 2 companies, but we are intending to, after piloting phase, to extend to other companies and other construction companies. Then another element on the skills development is on the also the issue that arises in the market system findings was the cost of formal training. The cost of formal training in Rwanda, when the students or the formal sector workers, when they go in the real formal training in the TVET institutions, it will realize that it is very expensive for them, and they cannot leave their job and attend the courses maybe for 3 up to 1 year duration of the training. So what the project is working with TVET institutions and government institutions, we are working with them in order to see how we can develop a short course training for these specific workers for commercial viable, because as the TVET institutions, first of all, they need to see that this is commercial viable, and then we see how we can work together. So far, as achievement, we have tried to work with the government institution in the development of curriculum for this specific group of workers, and we are extending this to the TVET institutions to see how they can use the developed short course modules to train or to upgrade the skills of workers in this specific sector. So the next step, we realize that this one, of course, we increase the skills and employability of trained workers. Then it will also escalate other private institutions in order to see how they can also make it their own sustainable and develop those short courses for the specific group of workers. On the rules and regulation, specifically on the rules and regulation, the issues that were underlying causes from the market system findings was that there was an issue of working conditions where our different laws, for example, the Rwanda Building Code. In Rwanda, it is the law that we found that does not include the provisions or elements on working conditions. So we tried to partner with public institutions and the Ministry of Infrastructure here in Rwanda to see how this Rwanda Building Code can be reviewed in order to include the provision or articles on the working condition. So we managed this as a project, and currently there is a new Rwanda Building Code which it was reviewed by the Rwanda Housing Authority, but of course with input from the project, and currently it includes elements of working condition. But we are still working with the Rwanda Housing Authority also to see how the joint inspection forms, it is a joint inspection form that is currently used by the institute, but of course we need to review those joint inspection forms in order to include their elements of working conditions, so that when there is joint inspection from the Ministry of Labor, from construction site, from engineer association, from architecture group, from one-stop centers which is in charge of inspecting construction buildings in Rwanda. If this inspection form is reviewed and includes elements of working condition, and then the inspectors going to the inspects on the ground, we see that this will result into complying with existing laws and also enforcing existing law, and of course contractors will now comply and obey what is provided in the law. So this is also an initiative that as a project we are pushing, and we think this as a project will impact and will impact on the compliance of the laws and the building sector in Rwanda. Steve, can you go on?
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. Just a quick summary of that last point there, which is interesting, is that the inspectors don't inspect the labor law particularly well. And construction had never been inspected, so we said, let's go look to see if we can include the labor law in areas where it is inspected. So then if it is provided that, well, contractors know they're going to be inspected, they have to include it in their cost they sort of submit to clients, their tender. So it's a way of protecting the contractors, who then can protect the workers, and then the investment in the workers is the cost of the client, or the developer, as opposed to the actual worker who now sort of bears the brunt of the lack of investment. So just quickly, I know we've probably gone on too long. We want to leave some time for discussion, but just the quick takeaways. Yeah, again, construction really important, growing, urbanizing, and poor working conditions are going to remain. Yeah, the challenges are obviously context specific, but it's really good if you're going through this process to understand the competitive pressures for contractors and why workers are actually in these vulnerable jobs. Always keep an eye out for the key constraints, and what we found are some of the interesting ones that are the skills, finance, procurement, and to some extent the other parts of the rules and regulation and enforcement that Alex spoke about. yeah, and then this kind of the last point reinforces good market systems practice, which is have a diverse set of interventions, but maybe the two areas to look at are sort of skills and then maybe the rules and regulation. So I'll stop there and turn it over to you guys for some questions if anyone has any. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thank you, Steve. Very interesting insight into very specific challenges, but in a sector which is clearly going to be hugely important for rural, well, for poverty reduction, employment, and so on in urban areas. I want to draw everyone's attention quickly again to the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner, which I hope you can see. If you can't see it, you need to click on the little circle icon in the bottom center of your screen. It's a tiny little, it's a speech bubble icon actually, but it looks like a circle, and then you'll get the chat box up. Now, a couple of your colleagues, your colleague Elisenda has already posted a link, and I think we've also posted a link to the related resources to this webinar. There's a blog, and there's a also an article about this work. This is the place where you can post additional questions, please. We've had one or two come in, and I'll refer to them in a minute. But I was going to start by throwing a couple of questions that we got to you during the sort of registration for the webinar. A couple of people have put in questions who may not be actually here in the room, but we still would like to put their questions to you as speakers. And the first one is about the role of apprenticeships, training apprenticeships in the construction sector. And is this something that you see happening in Rwanda? Is there a role for apprenticeships? And if so, what kind of strategies are likely to work?
Alex, do you want to take this, or you want to?
You can take it, no problem.
Okay, maybe I'll start. And again, so yeah, the apprenticeship area. Thanks for that, Mike. And it's a challenging space in terms of, as I said, this, and Alex said, yeah, the investment into workers is quite difficult when you have them on informal contracts, and we heard that over and over. That's yeah, if you invest in somebody, the chances are they get some skills and they're going to test the open market. There's really no loyalty between the two sides. So yeah, the apprenticeship side, or the sort of the role of apprenticeships is quite weak in most of these markets. I think the project may try to test something out and sort of yeah, I guess traditional apprenticeship model of having lower wages during the process, maybe sort of trying to get contractors to provide a contract to the apprentice during the period, such that they can maybe get more stability or have, I guess, some sort of reciprocity of the, such that they can avail of the investment that they have. So trying to get them locked into maybe a contract where they're paid lower for a period of time, and then understanding that they'll get paid market rate later. I'm not sure how that's going to work just yet. I know GIZ has done quite a bit of this work already, but I'm unsure if it's got legs to run on its own.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Hans is asking whether we could get back to the market system donut slide, and maybe you could speak a little bit more, elaborate why those three issues were I guess the one. Why those three issues you've got circled there with the dots were found or considered to be the most crucial issues in the sector?
Yeah, so I would say maybe they're not the three most crucial. I think they're the three where we saw commonalities and challenges across the three sectors. I think definitely skills I would say is probably the most crucial, but that also, and I think financial services it depends on the project's initiative and how big it is, but getting involved in financial services could be a little bit challenging for most market systems projects unless they have a very strong access to finance component of it. But yeah, I think probably, so the challenge is if you look exclusively at skills and you upgrade skills for the lowest skilled workers, that they're going to gravitate to better jobs, which is great, but then their old jobs are going to be filled by anyone. So the same sort of people are just going to keep filling these positions. So that's great because there's a need for skills and we can upgrade these jobs, but also we think that construction, there often needs to be some work in the rules and regulation. So we've said procurement and contracting is interesting to the space to work in because potentially that's an area where the governments, might see an incentive to sort of invest a little bit more in changing the way that they work for long-term gain of the sector, whether that's developing SMEs or developing or making sure that larger contractors can provide more for their workers. But we also understand that procurement and contracting can be quite a tricky space in a lot of countries. And actually the whole rules and regulation in construction can be quite difficult. It's in particular areas can have a lot of corruption. The enforcement component is huge and oftentimes, so I mean, we feel like a lot of countries have these laws, they're just not enforced. We all know that. But if we don't sort of improve the rules of the game, such that these contractors have to somewhat to work within the legal framework, they're never going to work within the legal framework because there's everything is cost driven. So we have to protect these contractors. We have to maybe enforce a little bit of what the laws are. We maybe have to such that they then again have to include this in their price quotes or sort of their tender submission. So I guess getting back to the question here, these maybe aren't the three, but perhaps I think you need to diversify among the top and the bottom here, and in particularly there needs to be some addressing of the bottom in the rules and regulation.
Here sorry, I've got wrong question, not Kate. I was going to ask you a separate question, which is from somebody from CDC Group, which is about the role of investors and DFIs in this space. Since you're talking about financial services, can they play an influencing role in terms of the practices?
Yeah, that is something that I let's see here. Let me go back to the particular question here if I can find it. Training, what role do you see investors and DFIs in this space? Yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't. Yeah, perhaps I don't know what the response would be or what your role might be. If you're investing at the company level, yeah, I guess it's depending on maybe some clarification on who you're investing in. Are you investing in the sort of contractors themselves? I'm guessing from the previous one, it looks like you're investing in the solar power sector. I don't know is the maybe the response. I would say if you're looking at training at women in the solar power sector, something that could be interesting is this model that Alex talked about, which is this sort of working through the suppliers to get market share. I mean, a very basic example of this is we had coffee in Rwanda, and the coffee machine distributor provided training to the baristas free of charge to make sure that their equipment was being used properly and that they could actually sell this equipment and that they could distribute the coffee. So maybe this is again something we're trying to do on the paint supply model, and sort of getting people to the paint suppliers to train painters so that people can actually put paint on the walls and they can gain market share. Maybe this is something that you can put the onus on the solar power company.
Okay, and do you see? There's a question from Kate Fogelberg about whether the analysis segmented different sorts of aspects of the construction sector, so residential versus commercial or industrial, and so were there any sort of noticeable differences in the issues arising in those segments?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so I would say most construction are these single unit residential pieces, which somebody may build over time. As soon as they have some cash, they build maybe a room, and so this is kind of prolonged construction. It's really not the same arrangement that we spoke about for these sort of larger commercial developments or maybe larger residential subdivisions. And that space itself is very difficult to influence from the rules and regulations side because it's quite obscure, and there is some inspection that goes on in Rwanda in that space, but generally what we've tried to analyze is maybe the sort of larger contracting area, because we feel like that's maybe an area that a project could have more reach. I mean, I guess through interventions and implementation, you may benefit both segments, but our primary objective is probably looking at the larger contractors.
So, thinking of those larger contractors, I mean, there's a very interesting long question from Grace Sebagani, trying to look at it from the point of view of the building contractors and their incentives. What would you, how would you frame the challenge of decent work as a win-win for contractors, in terms of reducing accidents at work? Or
this is hard because, yeah, I mean, sometimes I think in the ILO we try to say that, yeah, good working conditions are good for business, and there is evidence that supports that. In the construction sector, I haven't seen the specific evidence yet. I know that for contractors, their perception of investing into workers is that, okay, so if I pay these workers more, or invest in them more, I don't think they're going to work any faster than they already do, because there's such an informality to the sector that the workers are threatened by not having a job or not having a contract. So if they don't perform, they won't come back to work. So sort of the thinking behind investing by a contractor into the worker such that they produce more, that case may not exist in some of these contexts. More research could be done into looking at if there is some sort of case to invest in preventative culture so that you don't have to pay as many hospital fees for your workers when they get hurt. But oftentimes if somebody gets hurt on site and they're a low-skilled position, which are the most exposed to the sort of accidents on site, the contractor will just go grab somebody by the roadside to refill that position. So it's not a huge loss in time, and the value of that position is quite low to where they're not they're not losing out a lot financially. So I think it's hard in this space. In other sectors, I think it's easier to make the case, but I think it remains to be seen in construction here.
I suppose on the other side of the supply-demand equation is the question of whether the workers, whether there are any price signals to incentivize workers to gain better skills. Yeah, I mean the question from Carla Yoda.
So if we go back a couple here. All right, so this is basic sort of mapping of the the wages for workers in construction in Rwanda. And so we have finishing work in the top right there, which is about $7 to $22 a day. So that could be painting, plumbing, electricians, cabinetry. And then at the bottom, we have the manual labor, which is $2 to $3 a day. So yeah, the value of upgrading is you're getting between 3 and say 8, 9 times your wages. The problem is that that is very enticing, and there's a huge demand for almost all of the trades at the finishing work, or the sort of high-skilled trades in construction. Really, the problem is you just can't get people to invest. They don't have the money, and they don't have the time to actually take these courses, or they can't take the time off from work to get upskilled. So there's a clear pathway for these people to upgrade, or there's at least the demand for them, but they just can't do it. So that's why we're experimenting with these alternative, shorter training models, just to get people skills, to get them on site, so that they can then learn the rest while they're there. But not giving them comprehensive cabinet making skills, but just giving them basic carpentry skills or basic painting skills. But yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm just looking at whether there's any other questions that we haven't addressed in the list here, Steve. There was a question that came in earlier before the webinar started, from someone called Tindi Sitati, and it says, is there an opportunity to tap in to the kind of cooperatives movement to enhance the construction sector? I guess that might also include trade unions if such things exist. But Tindi says that they're exploring this in Kenya. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Alex, do you want to respond to that?
About the trade unions. Yeah, for maybe to share an example here in Rwanda, we are having a in the construction sector, and the trade union is doing a great job by first of all organizing informal sector workers from construction sector, and they are organizing them. And what they are doing now is that after organizing them, they are trying to work with different companies that are in different trades. They are now working in carpentry. They are working with different companies in order to see how, in terms of skills, in terms of organization, working with those companies to organize that specific group of workers, most especially in the informal sector. Another thing that the trade union has done is the recognition of prior learning for this specific group of workers. It is a program that is being run by the construction trade unions here in Rwanda, and there is a certification of recognizing of workers in that sector, and it is a continuous process, and many workers have gained recognition, and they are getting certified through this program. So it was a pilot program specifically for one province in Kigali city, but now, after seeing that it is very important for this specific group of workers, it is now the trade union is now working with the Ministry of Labor and other government institutions to see how they can extend it to other provinces, so that this specific group of workers can be recognized through in their construction site. So they find them in the construction site, and then they work with the contractors to see how they can recognize these workers. So it is a good work being done by the trade unions here in Rwanda, specifically in the construction sector.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder, does that relate again to this question that Grace asked about, or at least in her question, she mentioned the increasing worker protection labour laws in Rwanda, and does that link to that? Is there stronger enforcement of labour laws now? Is that something that's happening?
Yeah.
What's driving that?
Yeah, concerning protection of workers. Yeah, of course, when the workers are organized, they also through these trade unions, they are well protected, because we are talking about informal sector workers, and most especially, as the Steve has already indicated, the issue of rules and regulations. Most especially, you find that the labor laws, in terms of coverage, are not covering this specific group of workers. But after the construction company and the trade unions, they have entered into, they are in process of entering into collective bargaining to see that the workers in this sector are well protected. Currently, what they have, the construction companies and the trade unions are in the process of coming up with the collective bargaining, specifically concerning the protection of workers in the sector.
Thank you, Alex. That's very useful.
Thank you.
So, Steve, Alex, before we finish, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, I just wanted to take a moment to draw everyone's attention to a link in the chat box that my colleague Isabel just posted, which is a survey form, just to give us 2 minutes of your time to let us know what you thought about this webinar, and indeed whether there are any particular topics you would like to see in future webinars. The link is in the chat box. It's also shown on the slide that's just gone up. We have been recording this webinar. We will post it on the Beam Exchange site in the webinars on the webinars page, the link to which is on the slide in front of you. So if you want to listen again, or you want to share the link with somebody who wasn't able to be on the call but would be interested, please send them that link when you have a look. Steve, are there any final comments, or Alex, any final comments you'd like to make?
No, I mean, if there's something that wasn't answered, or you have if this piqued your interest or curiosity, then yeah, please reach out to me. I guess I can include my email address in the chat box here, but I'm happy to follow up with anyone if they would like. But thank you very much to yourself, Mike, and Isabel, and thanks to everyone for listening. And I'll turn it over to Alex here.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing the experience over there.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences, Alex, and we wish you the best of luck with the work in Rwanda. So everyone, thank you. That brings me Grab the Mic webinar to a close. There are more in the pipeline. You'll see the notices in the Beam update and through the Beam website coming from Isabel in due course, and we look forward to having you join us on another occasion. Have a great day, everyone.